Thanks for tuning in. Today we're joined by a very special guest, and that is Raoul Pal, the CEO of Real Vision Finance. Thanks so much for joining us today, Raoul.
It's great to be here. We're in different parts of the world today, but that's the magic of Zoom.
Absolutely, exactly. Joining you here from Hong Kong, and you're over in Little Cayman. So
that's right.
Absolutely. So, Raoul, I'm personally quite interested in your background, but also your vision for Real Vision Finance. And I really like the way that you've kind of made macroeconomics and very cerebral topics accessible to laymen and people who don't necessarily have a background in finance. Could you perhaps elaborate a little bit about what motivated you to start Real Vision?
Yeah, look, I've been lucky. I've been in the finance world for 30 odd years now. And what I realized in 2008 with the big financial crisis was that people like myself who were at the epicenter of the industry, I was connected to all the world's biggest hedge funds. My background was Goldman Sachs, where I set up and managed a large business there, then running a large global macro hedge fund. So I was kind of at the epicenter of it all. I'd been writing about it for my research service, Global Macro Investor, about 2008 and what was likely to happen. But then people came up to me, friends of friends of my parents, and said, why didn't we know? And I was like, why are some people getting all the information and others not? Is that fair? This is people's pensions, life savings, futures, everything is invested in this, and yet they don't know. So there was this segregation of with the smart guys, give us your money, and virtually no accountability. And that didn't sit well with me. I'd made a good career in finance, and I just thought, I need to do something about it. I didn't know what to do. Then I was in Spain over the Euro crisis, where the banks almost went bust and, all the governments almost went bust, Greece, Spain, Italy, etc. And again, the same thing happened. We all knew absolutely what was going on. And friends of my parents would come up to me, or friends of friends, or kids of friends, or whatever, would come up to me and go, well, why don't we know? I've just lost a fortune in banks because they forced me to buy preference shares as opposed to having a deposit account. And then they folded, and this is outrageous. Why didn't we know? And at that point, I knew I had to do something. Really, what I needed to do was to democratize financial intelligence, give it to everybody. Usually that's approached via dumbing it down, like, how do you have savings? The world has changed, and people are more comfortable now with the advent of YouTube and other things of going down the rabbit hole and learning themselves. Applied learning is the big trend. So I thought, okay, how can I move the dial on this? Realizing that video on demand technology, because the rise of Netflix and YouTube over that whole period had become huge, and it was disruptive because it used to be run by TV networks, and now you didn't have to be one. And now look where we are today, where we're just recording Skype calls and Zoom calls. Christ, the world's changed. I thought about that, and by a serendipitous moment met Grant Williams, one of the co-founders, Remy, who worked with me in Spain, and Damien Horner, who lived in the same village. And we just happened to get together and realized that we could do something about it, and it was video. We didn't know anything about video. We'd never made a video. Well, Grant had made a couple of videos, which were basically screen recordings, but that was it. But I just thought, well, I know almost everybody in the hedge fund space, and they won't go on CNBC because it's 3 minutes. What do you think the S&P is going to do today? Or what do you think about Apple's earnings? Nobody cares. What they want to do is talk in depth about how they think and how they do things. So I decided to start that, just interview the world's most famous investors and get them to offload what's on their minds, because there's nothing better than being taught by a mentor, because it's relatable, it's real. So we created real, personable, peer-to-peer conversations. And then we built out from that. So, we then started layering in all of the kind of experts to give people an unbiased, curated view of what was going on. So, we don't care, we don't have a view as Real Vision. And that's really important, because somebody like you needs to trust us that we're bringing you balanced, different viewpoints and interesting things that will help you become a better investor, or more knowledgeable about the world around you, or if it's in the case of students, an understanding of how finance actually works in the real world. And that's been so powerful. I mean, our audience are fanatic, and it's global, and it's young, and it's smart. It's amazing, and they hyper engage in the content. So we've been incredibly lucky. And from that, we've built out community, we've built out we're building out education offerings, all sorts of stuff to just keep adding value to everybody's financial lives. And people are learning, now we're in the middle of a huge recession, people are learning that finance is not something that exists over there. It exists with everyone.
Yeah.
And it affects everybody's lives every day.
That's fascinating. And on that note, I mean, obviously, Gen Z and millennials face a lot of headwinds in this era. And I would say that probably the majority of millennials don't even necessarily remember too much of 2008. I mean, I was approximately 15 at the time, and it seemed very intangible and abstract in a sense. But I think you probably agree that the crisis that we're facing now is far more widespread and more severe. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about what the younger generation can do to protect themselves in this new situation.
Well, the good thing that younger people have is all their future earnings ahead of them. So if anybody wants to make the biggest investment, make it in yourself. That's the key thing. We also operate in a world where you can have multiple revenue streams, because you might be able to make revenue from one thing and then from your main job. But so think about that robustness. Build your own portfolio. And that's about the robustness of your income stream and where you want to go in life. So then if you're 30 years old and you've got ahead of you, the next 30 years of trying to accumulate wealth, well, firstly, don't forget, income is worth more than capital. Because if you have $1 million and you stick it in the bond market, you're going to get $10,000 a year. Right? But for the average person to, over a couple of years, increase their income by $10,000 is not that unachievable. So it's like being a millionaire. Every 10 grand you have is like being a millionaire in terms of your earning power. So that's the key thing. Then after that, it's like, okay, look at the opportunity set in front of you. So let's say you're in a good job now, you're starting to invest, you're starting to save for the future. What is it? Well, my first thing always for everybody is, if you can, buy a home. Now that's the problem because they're expensive in most places, and I'll come on to that in a bit. But if you can, so I was really lucky. Back in 2000, I was living in a fancy apartment in London that I had a mortgage on, etc. And then I had a bonus, and I bought a house in Spain, which wasn't very expensive. It was $250,000, which nowadays you can't buy anything for. But it was a 6-bedroom house on the side of a hill near a beach town. The point being is now I've got a place to live. I can work a bar job and survive. Right? I'm now super robust. So I can now take risk. That becomes interesting. When you're in a safe place, to take risk becomes very attractive. So I would urge people to think about that. Get to that point of safety where you know you could take risk, then take risk. So what does risk look like? Well, right now, the equity markets are at all-time record valuations. Sure, emerging markets have done relatively worse, so maybe they're relatively more interesting, but they're expensive. Bond yields are all-time lows. Credit, all-time low yields. So you're not being paid to take risk. Most of these have a future expected return that's negative. But then there's a whole different world out there, which is the world of a new financial system being built, which is Bitcoin and Ethereum and DeFi and all of this stuff that people are hearing about. And Gen Z and millennials are much more aware of this because Gen Z particularly have lived in Minecraft and all of these things where tokens and digital assets have value. Right? It's not abnormal. It's abnormal for a baby boomer to think about that. But everybody else is like, yeah, of course it is. Tokens, of course we live with different currencies in different worlds. It's not a problem. So it's a small leap to Bitcoin, which has a future expected value higher than any other asset class in terms of risk reward. Sure, it goes up and down 50, 60, 70% down, but its upside is 10, 50, 100x. So if you're young, you can afford to take that bet because it can be life-changing. It's the same kind of bet, but better than the baby boomers got in 1980 when they were about 30 years old. Because what did they get? When they were 30 years old, they got a stock market at record low valuations and a bond market with record high yields. You almost have to be an idiot not to make money. Millennials are faced with something much harder, as are Gen Z, because property is expensive too, unless you move. The digital economy, and particularly COVID, has shown that we can move anywhere now. So if you think that you can get a quality of life in Thailand, because you're in Hong Kong, and you say, I'm not going to hang around in Hong Kong any longer, I'm going to go to Thailand, you can easily run a business from Thailand. Okay, so now you've got a quality of life advantage. You can probably buy a house for pretty cheap. Okay, so now you're safe and secure, and now you look at your future potential. Well, Bitcoin might be that answer. So it's going to be a new world, and that's good, because you guys, the millennials and the Gen Z, are not going to be following the old rules. And once you realize that, you're liberated.
Yeah, fascinating. And in a similar vein, it seems at the moment that there's a real bifurcation that's taking place in the economy, whereby you have big box retail and companies like Amazon, which seem to be scarfing up a lot of this stimulus money and comprising a bigger portion of the economy, especially with FANG stocks dominating equities. And it seems like a lot of the smaller businesses are being wiped out. And I remember watching a video in which you were describing the phenomenon in Spain, in particular in relation to restaurants and cafes that have been around for ages. I remember there was a restaurant here in Hong Kong that had survived both world wars, had been around for over a century, and then it closed down during this period. And I think that that's something that's probably very relatable across the globe. So I was wondering whether you think that this is something which is going to be exacerbated, or do you think that there might be a revival of small business?
I think if you're 30 years old, this is the biggest opportunity of your lifetime. Out of crisis comes opportunity. So what you've done is you've cleared out a load of old businesses, and the world is changing. I noticed this when I went to Japan a few years ago, is it bifurcates between the big brands and the big businesses, and then artisanal stuff. And we've seen that movement already across the US, across Europe, where people are opening, young people are opening like a cool bakers or a, cool clothing place where they make cool clothing themselves and stuff like that. So there is a bifurcation that's going on. And what you've just done is cleared out the high street of all of the old shit that needed to go. Now, that's painful and horrible because it's people's life savings and their businesses. But thinking like you should is, okay, all of that old stuff is gone. Rents are collapsing. I could start a business. Mm-hmm. Your probability of success of starting a business in a down cycle is so much higher than starting it when rents are high. You're competing for everything. And it is about doing unique stuff. Find your niche. The world used to be like Amazon, broad, but we're all finding that deep is the other strategy. Let's say you like baking, well, become the best. Because guess what? You will always have business. Or, you are particularly good at a certain thing. That opportunity is there. So retail is going to be a huge opportunity within this. It's just different retail. Don't sell stuff that everybody else sells. Sell unique stuff. We've seen it with the rise of, farm-to-table eating and food and all of this stuff. We've seen it with clothing. We've seen it with jewelry. We've seen it with all sorts of things. So there's opportunities for creative outlets, which you couldn't do in cities because it was too expensive. I mean, to have a creative idea for a business in New York City or Hong Kong or London, yeah, you get marginalized to the kind of other neighborhoods. Well, guess what? That's going to change. So yes, it's terrible. And yes, it's going to be lingering. And yes, it's miserable for many. But change is always opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very positive way of looking at this. Something related to this, actually, you spoke earlier about the democratization of information. I was wondering what you think the impact is going to be on higher education. The fact that now we have all of these independent content creators and thought leaders who are able to provide very practical and very relevant knowledge to the younger generation in particular. What do you think the impact this is going to have on higher education, universities?
I think this is massive. Right. It's something that we're all over. When we started Real Vision, there was a friend of mine who was running the largest television company in the UK, private, non-BBC, and YouTube had just launched. And I said, how's business, blah, blah, blah. I said, great, blah, 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 but I'm worried about YouTube. He said, why the hell do you care? It's cat videos. This is like 2006, 7. It's like, it's cat videos. He's like, no. He goes, we pay £100 million for a broadcasting license. And now anybody can become a TV company. So fast forward, and COVID's just been the accelerant. It's like YouTube has just turned up. Anybody can become a university.
Right.
You don't even need premises. It's so disruptive, you can't get your head around it yet. Yes, of course, excellent centers of learning, top universities, Harvard, Oxford, whatever, they will always persist, but their offering will change. But there is no reason to have, particularly in the US, hundreds of universities spread around places. It's not going to happen, because I know at Real Vision we could create an applied finance course that's better than 90% of what's out there, and for a fraction of the cost, because we'd start from scratch. No buildings, not millions of lecturers, all of the stuff that goes with it, all gone. So the cost of education is about to collapse, and we want to be at the forefront of that. Fascinating.
Now, obviously, you've done a lot of fantastic videos on the coming retirement crisis, and that was actually probably some of the first content of yours that I watched. And I've been wondering recently, do you see that crisis sort of dovetailing with what's going on at the moment?
Yes. So the retirement crisis is essentially the fact that the largest cohort of people in the world is the baby boomers. Yes, the millennials in the US are slightly larger than the baby boomers, but elsewhere in the world, nobody had such a large millennial population. So the baby boomers are everything. They hold all the wealth, they have all the pensions, and they're all between 60 and 75. So they're hitting retirement age. Problem is, particularly in the US, is they have massive overweight equities and high risk because they never got enough money into their pensions. Now, when you go into recession, equity returns generally go down. We've got this weird market right now, which is bifurcated. A bunch of equities are doing terribly. The big names are going up. Well, guess what? The big names are going up because they're driven by millennials, because they love the stories of Tesla or whatever it is, Apple. But actually, banks, oil companies, industrial companies, they're all doing terribly. And that's partly because the baby boomers are forced to sell equities over time. Because if you think about it, when you stop earning money, you need to sell your assets over time to realize the money to spend. The problem is as that goes on and bond yields go so low, these guys don't have enough money to retire on. Now, if that stock market rolls over again, because the economy actually ends up weighing on these high-flying stocks that everybody thinks are bulletproof, then we've got a huge problem, because you're going to wipe out the retirement savings at retirement date of people who now can't earn a new income. So that's a really terrifying situation. Again, for the millennials, you've got a bifurcated view here, because on one hand, you don't want your parents to get screwed over by this because it's going to become your problem. But the other side is like, yeah, please, I'd like you to sell your expensive houses at much cheaper prices and sell your equities to me at much cheaper valuations. That's how you should be thinking in this. But you've got the other emotional side is, well, I don't want to see my parents go through hardship. But that's where we are. That's the situation. And that will play out over the next 10 years.
Now, on a more personal note, I found your background quite interesting. And there was one thing in particular that really stood out to me, and that was the fact that you initially applied to work for Goldman Sachs, and then you received the rejection letter. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
So I was pretty good at school by around 15. Then I discovered girls. Then I went to college and discovered cars and the pub.
Right.
And then I realized I could just coast. So I coasted through, failed a bunch of exams, had to retake them, and then ended up only getting one offer for the university. So I had one place. I had no choice, and it was a pretty crappy university, but it's all I had. So I did a degree in economics and law, and I got a decent grade, a 2-1. And I came into the job force, bang on a recession, 1990. And I had the choice of I didn't have a choice. I wanted to do either two things, marketing or finance. I just lived through, I wrote my dissertation on junk bonds because it was the racy time of the 80s, because I was at university kind of 87, 88, 89. And that period was the kind of go-go years of the late 80s when everyone was driving a red Porsche and wearing braces. And it was the greed is good era of Wall Street.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I want this. My father came from a marketing background. And so I was like, I'm also interested in marketing. And you always do these kind of things to appease your parents, right? So I'll never forget, it was my father's birthday. And he had a bunch of friends over. And somebody came to me, it was my final year of uni. I think I might have just left. He came to me and said, Raoul, what do you want to do? I said, I'm thinking about either marketing or going into banking. He's like, I said, have you got any advice for me? He goes, oh yeah, it's very simple. I said, okay, what's that then? He goes, Well, you can go and work for an amazing marketing company like Mars and be at the cutting edge of consumer marketing, and they'll give you free Mars bars. Or you can go and work for a bank and get free money. I was like, okay. So that was it. I'm going to go and work for a bank and get some of this free money. Problem was, nobody wanted me. I hadn't gone to a top university, and we're in a massive recession of which everybody was being laid off. And I applied to everybody. And I've still got them to this day, because humility is an important thing in life, is, embracing your downs as well as your ups. And I've got a box full of rejection letters, about 130 of them. And I applied to everybody. I wasn't just finance at that point. I was now desperate. And I applied to Oracle and Microsoft and anybody. Nobody wanted me.
Right.
And then I thought, okay, I'm going to solve for this another way. I'm just going to find another way through the back door. And I'd been lucky enough to get a summer job at a company called Dow Jones Telerate, which is like a Bloomberg of the time. It was huge at the time. So when you see the film Wall Street, all those green screens, they're Telerate screens. I managed to get in there as a graduate trainee, talked my way into a customer support for a technical analysis product, then managed to do some sales when it wasn't my job. So they promoted me as salesman. And then I did new business sales, which really is a hard job, but it teaches you how to sell. And I got sales training and that kind of stuff. And then again, through luck and perseverance, I found a recruitment consultant that kind of was interested in me and my sales experience, thinking, well, he could probably do well in the bank, because banks were now starting to grow again. I get a job, 1991, 92, so a couple of years later, and I get on a desk at a company called James Capel, which was like the brokerage arm of HSBC. It was also the stockbrokers to the Queen. It was a very fancy firm and very well respected. I got in there in equity derivatives, new market. It was a hugely growing space. Hedge funds were coming in and starting to use derivatives, futures and options to place big bets. And 6 months on the job of learning, my boss left, and so did somebody else. So I got promoted, and I took the opportunity with both hands. Out of change and out of crisis comes opportunity. So I took it. And that led me to then realize that there was a customer base that I really liked, which was the hedge fund world, because I understood how they were thinking. And they were the glamorous kind of customers as opposed to the pension funds and that kind of stuff. So I started getting involved in that. I then eventually moved firms, took the team with me, and I started building my reputation in that area. And then through a bunch of luck, serendipity, and hard work, I became the kind of go-to guy. And then one day, my Bloomberg terminal flashed with his name on it, Manny Roman, and he was the partner who ran equity derivatives at Goldman. And he said, listen, I've checked you out from all the hedge funds, and you're the guy. Can you come? And so 27 interviews later, and that was pretty light I did 17 interviews. I think 27 to 30 was the average to get into Goldman at the time. I came in as a lateral hire, which is very rare at the time. They didn't hire people who weren't trainees from start, and built the business there. And a gift of an opportunity. So I got called up by somebody in personnel 6 months into the job. And she goes, is that Raoul? I said, yeah. She goes, hi, this is Kate, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you remember me. I was at Plymouth with you, university. I'm like, I can't quite remember. I was quite a sociable guy. I'm like, I can't quite remember. She goes, I was part of the kind of rugby, football, sport, social kind of group. I'm like, oh, okay. She goes, I saw that you joined, and I just wanted to check something. And you were the first person in the history of the University of Plymouth to work in the front office at Goldman. I'm like, wow. So you can make your dreams happen. How I do that, I find that living in a future state and working backwards to solve for it is the most powerful thing that you can do. So you think of yourself, okay, 5 years' time, what do I want to be doing? How do I get there? Because then you open your brain synapses to opportunity.
Yeah, fantastic. And what was the reason behind you wanting to join Goldman in particular?
They were the number one choice for every MBA in the world at the time. It was a ludicrous accumulation of intelligence and experience and skill. They have a culture that was some parts difficult to deal with because it's quite oppressive, but other parts it was a culture of excellence. I knew that a culture of excellence was going to be a powerful thing. Also, Goldman has the best network on earth, bar none. It's the greatest firm to have ever worked for. Now, I left it saying I've had enough of this bloody place. So it's not like, I was a Goldman Group and it's like the greatest firm ever. No, I was sick to death of it after a few years.
But I think it's very refreshing for, in particular, younger people to hear your story, because young people have a very linear idea of what success is like. I.e., you get very good grades, and then you go to the right university, and as a result of that, you land a good
job. And I'm gonna say that when I was at Goldman and I had to hire and be part of the graduate intake, I would reject all of those people.
Right.
Because they're identikit. The actual thing that gives career success really is character and diverse, broad experiences. Those two things combined with a sense of competing with oneself and not with everybody else is, I think, the defining thing of success. So I would always choose people who traveled over people who went to work at Credit Suisse in their summer holidays, because I want that person who's backpacked through the Amazon, because guess what? They can throw anything that life comes at them. I want to see people who have a personality, who have a character, that done things that are sociable and interactive, and not just for their CV, just for the sheer joy of it. You want those people because they're adaptable. And if they're smart as well, then you've got the Holy Grail.
Yeah, that's some very good advice. And thank you so much for joining us today, Raoul. It's been a real pleasure. And I hope to have you back sometime.
Absolutely. Good luck with it all. And hope people find this useful. And if anybody wants to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Raoul, Raoul GMI. I'm always on there and engaging. And also, check out Real Vision. There's a free YouTube channel. So that's a great way to start going down the rabbit hole and learning more. So I think it's called Real Vision Finance. So check that out and enjoy it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Raoul. We'll put all that information in the description, and hope to see you again soon.
Perfect. Thanks so much.